Karen Cho will be joined by a prestigious panel of CEOs and thought leaders. So please take a seat. The discussion will begin shortly.
It was in these Swiss mountains that the world was first introduced to the phrase the Fourth Industrial Revolution, and it's been a hot topic among academics, politicians, and business leaders ever since. But what exactly does it mean? The term Fourth Industrial Revolution was coined by the founder of the World Economic Forum, a former professor named Klaus Schwab. Schwab wrote a book with that title to describe an era marked by a technological revolution that is blurring the lines between the physical, digital, and biological spheres. Let's break that down. Technologies like artificial intelligence, autonomous vehicles, or the Internet of Things are becoming ingrained in our day-to-day lives and even our bodies. Think of voice-activated virtual assistants, Face ID recognition, or healthcare sensors. Schwab first presented his vision of the Fourth Industrial Revolution at the World Economic Forum's annual meeting here in Davos in 2016. But to understand the idea, we need to go much further back in history, to Industrial Revolution number 1. The first Industrial Revolution started in Great Britain around 1760 and spread to Europe and North America through the early 1800s. It was powered by a major invention, the steam engine. The result? New manufacturing processes, the creation of factories, and a booming textiles industry. From the late 1800s, the Second Industrial Revolution was marked by mass production and new industries like steel, oil, and electricity. The light bulb, telephone, and internal combustion engine were a few of the major inventions of this era. The Third Industrial Revolution, sometimes known as the Digital Revolution, occurred in the second half of the 20th century. In just a few decades, we saw the invention of the semiconductor, personal computer, and the internet. So what separates the Fourth Industrial Revolution from the Third? Experts say the main difference is that technology is merging more and more with humans' lives, and that technological change is happening faster than ever. Consider this. It took 75 years for 100 million users to adopt the telephone. Instagram signed up 100 million users in just 2 years, while Pokemon Go caught that amount in 1 month. 3D printing is just one example of fast-paced technology in the Fourth Industrial Revolution. The industry has gone from a business idea to big business, with 3D printer shipments expected to increase from just under 200,000 in 2015 to 2.4 million in 2020. Today, you can have a hip replacement from a 3D printed bone, or use a 3D printed bionic arm. Talk about blurring the line between humans and technology, right? This new era of technology is driving a lot of innovation. You can see in this chart the number of patents related to the Fourth Industrial Revolution for things like 3D printing or AI has been climbing up and up since early 2000. Organizations are embracing new technologies to make their businesses more efficient, similar to how they embraced the steam engine during the First Industrial Revolution. But some companies and governments are struggling to keep up with the fast pace of technological change. Research shows innovators, investors, and shareholders benefit the most from innovation. The risk is that the Fourth Industrial Revolution is making inequality, which is already a big issue, even worse. One study found billionaires have driven almost 80% of the 40 main breakthrough innovations over the last 40 years. That's a problem when the richest 1% of households already own nearly half of the world's wealth. Experts warn we are in a winner-takes-all economy, where high-skilled workers are rewarded with high pay and the rest of workers are left out. Studies confirm technologies like AI will eliminate some jobs and create demand for new skills that many workers don't have. Privacy concerns are another issue as the Fourth Industrial Revolution turns every company into a tech company. Industries from food to retail to banking are going digital, and they're collecting a lot more data about their customers along the way. Users are starting to worry that companies know too much about their private digital lives. The World Economic Forum says a majority of leaders don't have confidence their organizations are ready for the changes associated with the Fourth Industrial Revolution. With tech changing fast every day, it's time to catch up.
Welcome back to the program. French Finance Minister Bruno Le Maire has warned that Alstom and Siemens won't make any more concessions in their bid to push through a rail merger. EU antitrust regulators have demanded that both firms make more divestments to address competition concerns. Speaking to CNBC, Siemens CEO Joe Kaeser said this merger would be a historic moment for the EU.
We provide within the train and we provide long-term solutions which are based on competitiveness and not on regulations. And I think it's important that the European Union understands which way it wants to go.
Is this discussion?
Yeah, it is. It is. The Siemens-Alstom matter will be a historical proof point whether or not the European Union has understood on how to look into, let's say, global socio-economic factors and not a rule-based system which goes into 28 countries and look at 28 single markets. And so we'll see how it goes. I'm really curious on how it turns out. I'm still sort of optimistic because we have smart people. The commissioner is very well aware that this is important.
That's right, but what about the messages? Because what you've got is a message from Angela Merkel and a message from Emmanuel Macron about trying to get this deal done to create a rail champion, yet the regulator, Vestager, does not seem to be listening, is concerned about other issues. So do you think that pressure from the top, well and truly above the pay grade that we're talking about at your company, could get this deal done?
Well, look, I mean, the Commission is right when she says we must not confuse industrial policies with antitrust policies. So it's got to be for the greater good of the customers. Customers need to continue to have options. However, in trying to assess what's good for the customer in the long term, it takes a long-term view. And it's got to have a global view and not look backwards and say, 10 years back we had, everybody had a national champion. Those days are over. And if you want to embrace Industry 4.0, the fourth industrial revolution, we need to look forward. We need to create the world and not basically hold it back from developing.
Joe Kaeser there saying, get on with it, regulators. Funny that. Right, we've been asking various Davos delegates about their policy predictions. Lots of alliteration when it comes to interest rates, getting views from both sides of the Atlantic.
Last year, rates have been, too low because of this flow of capital and liquidity into the market. After the catastrophes in 17, we expected a much stronger price increases, and they were calmed down by the liquidity provided to the market. Let's see what happens this year.
The ECB, I think they should just continue on the current path of keeping the policy as where it is. Just see how things pan out. At this moment, I would just stay with what we are doing and just react on the back of some of these developments.
The minutes are clear that as they reach the neutral rate, they have said we have to be careful now and watch data. We're data dependent, and that is meeting to meeting. An analogy a great economist once made to me, think of them as climbing one of these mountains, handhold to handhold. There's no path at the left. They've reached the path, and now the question is what they're going to do, and that's going to be dependent on data.
Do you know, Jeff, I'm reading two sets of books at the moment. One's fiction.
How ambitious.
I'm reading something called The Historian, which is a modern-day kind of Bram Stoker. It's a horror story.
Right.
But I'm also reading some factual horror stories as well at the moment. And one of them I get is quarterly, and it comes from the IIF, and it's the debt report. And Tim Adams is the president and CEO of the Institute of International Finance and joins us now. Tim, you give me a quarterly horror story, and I read it with utter morbid fascination every quarter. It's called Your Debt Report.
Yes.
And your last one came out just, literally a couple of weeks ago.
Indeed,
I think it was.
yes. Well, good morning, guys. Yes. Yeah.
And by coincidence, even before I knew I was interviewing you, I've got all the stats here as well. I'll just go for one or two of the numbers. $244 trillion of global debt, 318% of debt of global GDP that equals. But it's the corporate sector rise in debt, which I have in my head now. In the 10 years since the peak of the financial crisis, we've gone up $27 trillion to $72 trillion. It's horrendous. How come no one in Davos is talking about it?
I don't know. I'm amazed because it is bone-crushing debt, and that's what we refer to it as. We're always looking for metaphors, and we run out of metaphors, actually. 318% of GDP globally. We're up $70 trillion in this cycle. We've really levered up during this expansion. At some point, we've got to service all this debt.
When this crisis because it will hit, they'll say, you didn't warn us at the IF, and CNBC, you were just cheerleaders for the market, you didn't warn us. Well, this is what we're trying to do now.
Putin's five-year plan and the consequence with which the country is implementing it, there is a very long-term pattern and a commitment to keep the growth going. In the US, definitely the first quarter now is being dampened with the uncertainties around the government shutdown that we're experiencing, and we naturally will see that in the pattern of decision-making. If I go over to Europe, we have the big Brexit uncertainty, that on the industrial side, players like us, we see people being cautious, saying what comes out of it. Other parts of Europe, whether it's Italy or some other countries, we need to watch very closely. So I think our task as industrial leader in 2019 is very, very simple. We need to stay close to our customers and make sure that the underlying growth opportunities are realized. And then we fly on side very, very quickly. And as you rightly say, we need to react very, very smoothly and fast if the downturn realizes, if some of the uncertainties realizes, to make sure that the industrial space doesn't get hit too hard.
And Antonio, let's hear from you as you also weigh up financial conditions as well as some of the strength in key markets.
Well, I basically agree with the views that have been expressed. So number one, the world economy is growing at a healthy pace, a little bit lower, as David said, for this year, but 3.5% is a very good number, increasing living standards. Having said that, it has a decelerating trends. So the fiscal stimulus in the US is coming to an exhaustion of the normal cycle, given it has been done 15 months ago. You have monetary policy tightening, you have QE being unwinded, and you have the dollar strengthening. So there is some trend for the US to potentially decelerate. You see China at very healthy levels also decelerating. You see Japan decelerating, and you see the European Union, probably the one that is decelerating most, and which I believe is the biggest reason, David, why you have decreased the forecast for this year. So you have Italy potentially going into recession. You have Germany decelerating significantly. You have the impact to be seen of what's happening in France. And obviously you have the impact to be seen of the outcome of Brexit. So this is the second point. So we are in a decelerating trend, but within very healthy levels. Thirdly, we have significant risks. We have the trade risk, and we have to bear in mind that trade is the biggest reason and the biggest factor that increases living standards, and trading is under threat, as we know. We have the fact that tightening of monetary policies and QE unwinding put pressure on financial assets, and we have political uncertainty, I would say, across the world, especially in Europe, especially in the Brexit situation.
I'm glad
we have to be careful about this, and governments must manage this mindfully.
I'm glad you mentioned the R word, because that was my next question. I want to talk about the risk of recession. You mentioned Italy as likely to dip into recession. There are concerns about Germany, whether the powerhouse economy also goes into a technical recession this year. Do you think it's a possibility?
So it is a possibility. It is a possibility. But what I think is most likely to happen is on the German situation, which is the most important, given it is the main economy in Europe and obviously the fourth largest in the world. I think Germany is seriously considered, as the new chancellor alluded to do a fiscal stimulus, which is probably what the German economy needs. And Germany is one of the few economies in the world that has capacity to do that. So when you look at 2008, and you look at 2018, Germany, I think, together with India, is one of the only two economies on the G20 that has less debt than pre-crisis, when the world increased debt very significantly. So Germany is an export machine, trade is under threat, economy is decelerating. Germany should and could do a reflectionary package, And I think it's hopeful what the new chancellor has alluded to. Italy has more constraints given the pact with Europe, the 2% ceiling. I thought there was a good compromise between the Italian government and the European Union about what the level of the deficit in Italy should be. And therefore, in Italy, the situation is, I would say, is more volatile.
Well, they certainly took their time getting to an arrangement. Kay, I want to ask you about recession risk. The US, if you saw the reaction on stock markets as we wrapped up 2018, the market was almost reacting to the prospect of a deep downturn, some sort of a slowdown that wasn't just coming off some very high numbers. It was a very negative sentiment that you saw in the markets. If you're concerned about recession in 2019, where would you be looking for that downturn?
I think there are quite a few places to pick from in the world, as we've heard. I want to focus a little bit on my remarks on China, because I think that the Chinese economic slowdown has been one of the key risk factors for the global economy. I think there's still a little bit of misunderstanding about what's driving the slowdown. Yes, China is slowing down, but I would characterize that as Chinese growth as slower but safer, because let's not forget that a few years ago, China was the kind of ticking financial bomb to the financial markets because of the high debt issues. What did the government do? The government ramped up efforts to deleverage. What's the consequence? It actually worked. If you look at the financial sector, leverage has really come down. Corporate sector is still high but stabilized. Household sector is climbing, but household debt is quite low to begin with in China. So you really see deleveraging really working in the economy. But there are consequences to that. There is a cost to that. That's the economic cost. So what we're seeing in terms of slowdown is precisely partly accumulation of past problems, which I'll come back to, but the natural consequence of too much debt and deleveraging efforts. So China is now less financially fragile than in the past. And so the balance between financial risk and a slowdown of economic risk is where the government treading. Now the government is now focused a bit more on growth, because of the financial stability, and now financially it's more stable, and it's injecting a lot more liquidity into the economy. Still, that said, China does face issues, and I think that the world is focusing too much on the symptoms, on the short-term symptoms of debt. It's not looking at the essential question is, how do you get this credit, these kind of resources into the real economy? It's kind of stuck in the financial sector at the moment.
Ulrich, you wanted to jump in.
Yeah, look, I mean, when you take China, and we are active there since more than 100 years, I think the country is really going in a completely different quality of growth. I can only support that. The past consumption-driven growth, the growth where every mayor was mandated to build capital equipment in certain industries, I think this is something that is over, and the quality of the growth that we're seeing has a completely different parameters to itself. If I look at the innovation element, that's in China, the AI investments that we're seeing that are very, very significant, that will drive a certain amount of prosperity in there. When I take the quality of the industry environment in China, it's definitely the heavy process industries. They are still slow and the investment is not very strong. But if I go over to the more discrete industries, there's significant movement. China will play a role in the e-mobility space as a leader, not only locally, but globally. And we see enormous investments coming in, not only on the vehicle side, but also the infrastructure side. So I think I would agree, the quality of growth of China is tremendously changing. But I local activities really competitive. It needs to be world-class in terms of quality. It needs to be world-class in terms of productivity. And it needs to be world-class in terms of cost. The re-emergence of the American automotive industry and the recreation of jobs in the Detroit area has gone hand in hand in investments in automation. When we look at the large economies, it really proves that a combination of technology and people will create jobs. And I think that's something that we need now to really make sure we lift this all around the world. There's a tremendous opportunity that we can drive prosperity and growth if we adopt technology in a good way. Take India. India wants to have an emerging car industry, and it's very clear there the quality of the output will only be possible if you use technology combined with human labor. So there's a different driver in markets like India compared to a market like the US, but it's really, really significant. And the third point that I want to mention is a tremendous opportunity in emerging markets to use AI to really get domain expertise democratized. Because if you look at the skill level in emerging markets, it's very often not the issue. You have people coming out of universities in a very skilled way, but the experience is missing. If you use AI and experience-based and reasoning-based AI to complement the skill base that we have, then we have also the gap closed in terms of domain expertise. And that means in emerging markets, out of the sudden, the local engineering, the local value added will be competitive. So as the world is dampening and as we have uncertainties around the world, one of the recipes to counter that as a country, to counter that as a company, is the smart use of technologies.
David, do you want to tackle red flags if you're looking at the global economy? Where could we see recession in 2019?
Well, let me start by saying that the IMF's not projecting recession this year or next. Our growth baseline for growth is continued growth, 3.5 this year, 3.6 next year. But we see the risks, and I think it's the risks that could bring on recession. I would point to several. The trade tensions, the discussions with China may go well. There's incentive on both sides who could benefit from a deal, and I agree with what Keiyu said, that many of the changes that are being asked of China will, if China undertakes them, benefit China over the long term.
But if we don't have trade resolution...
But if we don't have a resolution, and the U.S. tariffs are legally mandated to go up in March, if there's not action to change that, China would surely retaliate in that setting where there would be uncertainty about how long those would stay in place. You'd have not just the direct effects of the tariffs on the products affected, but you'd have uncertainty about the future that might affect investment both in China and in the United States, and uncertainty about trade patterns, how they might change and how global value chains might have to evolve. So that's one.
Before we move on to the rest of the points, can I ask you, if there is a trade deal, is there still risk of recession? Because you might see an ongoing fight, but the fight will just evolve to more around technology, 5G, where you see both countries at loggerheads, maybe on a company-specific level. I mean, we've already seen evidence around Huawei, the arrest of the CFO. So this could go on, couldn't it, beyond what we're just talking about with this trade dispute?
Ulrich has pointed to many of the very positive and the inability to distinguish what's what is leading to discontent with trade and with globalization that I think threatens, more generally than the United States, threatens some fragmentation in the global economy. So this is the technological change is very likely to be beneficial over time, but it does bring dislocation. It brings uncertainty. It brings uncertainty about the future of work, especially for people of lower skilled workers and so on. So I think one has to view that, at least in the short run, as something that could be problematic.
I think, if I may just respond to that, we have heard that argument since the 70s when robots were introduced to the automotive industry, and people will say there will be no employment anymore in the automotive industry, it will be just robots. Fact is, today we have the highest level of employment that we have ever had. When we look at reality at the moment, we are facing labor scarcity in quite some parts of the world. Go to the US at the moment, go in one of our factories and try to hire a blue-collar worker. It's not so easy because there's basically full employment. Go to what I call the Eastern Banana in China and go along that. We have rising labor costs. We have a real scarcity on the labor market. And I can tell you at the moment, when we go in China and help a customer with robotic solutions to free up labor, they immediately elevate this person to another job because I said, I cannot have enough. In the US, we have here in Davos, I met quite a couple of customers. They said, you need to come and help me because we need to free up work inside our company because we can't get it on the labor market anymore. If growth dampens, I think David has a very, very good point. That's something that we need to look at. But altogether, I think our responsibility as leaders, whether it's government, whether it's education, or whether it's industry, we need to proactively manage the visible to be anticipated dislocation that is there. But I'm not that concerned that it will be killing us altogether. If you look at the amount of new jobs that's being created, if you look at the amount of entire new industries that are being created, it's enormous. We recently had, my mother was visiting us and asked my son, what do you want to become? And he said, well, maybe I could become a web page designer. And she looked at him and said, what job is that? These are jobs that we wouldn't have had many years ago. So we need to manage it actively. There is a risk, but I'm also confident that if we run it in the right way and take between government, education, and industry the right actions, we can have a good proactive management
Can I react to that? Look, I think that's the positive side, and there's a lot of truth to it. But I want to make one distinction, which is between advanced economies and emerging and developing countries. Mm-hmm. In the advanced economies, I think we have seen winners and losers. As one sees in capitalism and market economies, when things change, we've seen winners and losers and discontent among the losers. We haven't really seen winners and losers in the emerging market and developing world because growth is so high that you have big winners and smaller winners. We've actually looked at the IMF. If you look at income distribution by decile, even the lowest 10% have gained. And in a country like Vietnam, for example, where it's growing at 7% year in and year out, if you lose a job, you'll find another job and it'll probably be a reasonably good paying job. Now, in the United States, yes, the unemployment rate is at a low, but if you look by decile, you find that some people have lost a job and they've found another job that's not as well paying. And it's that, the discontent that comes from that, which is a result somehow, we don't know exactly the combination between trade, technology, and perhaps some other effects. So I think in the long run, the technology will bring many gains. The question is who gains, and how to deal with the fact that we've long known, economists have always favored free trade because the gains from trade are so large that you could compensate the losers and still have something left over. But in fact, we don't compensate the losers. And the fact that there's this discontent is changing our politics in the United States, in Europe. It may be, I fear that it's a preview of coming attractions for emerging market and developing countries, that at some point, the middle income trap may become more a middle income black hole if technology leads to substantial reshoring and a loss of opportunity for underskilled or low-skilled workers in emerging market countries.
If I may just react on that one more thing. I think we also need to look at the pyramid bottom up. In 1990, about 30% of global mankind lived below the extreme poverty zone. Today, it's less than 10%. And the countries that have embraced technology, like China and India, have done a tremendous job addressing the lowest income people. Regions of the world that have not done so, like Africa, have today more people below the extreme poverty line than others. So I agree with your point. I think the proactive management and the responsible management, especially on a geographic specific situation. In China and India, it might be lowest income. In the US, it's the middle income hold. We need to manage that jointly.
Right, Antonio.
Yeah, I think this is a really important point. If you look on a broader perspective, as has just been said, 200 years ago, 80% of people lived in poverty. Yeah. Now, as you just said, it's less than 10%. Still, it's 700 million people. Secondly, the problem is in the middle, especially in the advanced economies, as David said. And the question here is new technologies, AI, robotization, they drive away lots of jobs which are focused on repetitive functions. I think it is a must, both for governments in terms of policies and CVs, education, and for us as business leaders in corporations, to train our people and give them the skills they will need in the future, either inside the company or outside the company. So just to give you an example, in Lloyd's, where we are doing a massive transformation and digitization of the bank, we have last year did more than 1 million hours of training. It's a huge absolute number, but to put it on a relative context, it is 600,000 more hours than the previous year, to train people. And also at the same time, we are opening new jobs in terms of programmers, statisticians, mathematicians, engineers. So there is a huge revolution here. And final point, when you look at what people feel, I'm just referring to the Edelman survey published this week, it's incredible that most people in most countries, when they are asked on a 10-year view, 5-year view, how they feel about their job, they feel that they will be worse off in 5 years' time than they are today. So I really think that on a longer-term view, this is a huge problem that we together, when I say together, businesses, governments, we must address, because this is one of the biggest sources of uncertainty, anxiety, and division in the world.
Yet strangely, those same employees trust their employers more than anyone else.
Absolutely.
I want to ask you about who steps in to solve the middle class problem, because we've had yellow vest protests in France. A couple of months ago, there was talk of almost revolutionary conditions on the ground in Brazil. We've got a US government shut down because there's so many deep divisions across the country on ideology. And then there's Brexit in the UK, again, another populist vote on how we move forward. So who solves the middle class challenge? It doesn't feel like it's now a game for central banks because they're tapped out. When you talk about fiscal side, well, governments have an enormous amount of debt, so they can't tap in to the fiscal side to spend up to make conditions easier for the middle class. That just leaves big business, who, let's face it, have a vested interest in growing profits still. We've not seen a huge sharing of those profits since the financial crisis. So isn't the middle class going to be left to
I would say yes and no. I think you are right in most of what you said. I think obviously it's such an important problem that there is no silver bullet. But yes, I do think that business leaders have a special responsibility. And the way it tackles to what you said about profits is having a purpose. So companies more and more need to have a purpose beyond profit creation. Profit creation is obviously a good thing. Profits is the same thing as value added. That's what creates wealth. That obviously has to be properly distributed, but profits is good. But profits have to come after purpose in a company. And more clients, more and more employees need a purpose to join a company, and they want to feel that they have a social meaning. For example, in Lloyd's, our purpose is to help Britain prosper, and we absolutely live and breathe it every day. We have a plan with metrics, objective, with dates, and everything goes around that. And that is something which I see more and more companies doing, and I think that will do our bit in terms of businesses to train our people, to give them skills, and as I told you before, skills that will make them more useful, either in their job in the company or as people in other jobs in the future. That's our obligation to our employees.
And if I just complement that, if I take our own example as industry, but why do people trust companies at the moment more than governments? Because we navigate the world with a steady hand, we drive change and a more predictable change. I give our own example. In 2005, in terms of the employment structure, 2005 I joined ABB, we had about 90,000 people, about 50-50 blue collar, white collar, 47,000 blue collar. And we had about 19 billion turnover. Today we have $36 billion turnover, we have 146,000 people, and we have 42,000 blue collar and more than 100,000 white collar. And that change has come from our own horsepower. We have invested in our people. When we took technology and drove repetitive jobs out, we reinvested in our people, because that's, by the way, economically also more attractive than restructuring. Putting training on a person might cost $30,000, restructuring might be $100,000. So if you take somebody in a time of growth, redeploy the person, get it retrained. It might be a different type of job. It might move from a blue to a white-collar job. Yes, we need to invest some of our potential profits in it. But the long-term sustainable positioning of your company comes not only from giving profit to the shareholders, it comes from reinvesting money into your own people, in your team, in your skills and capabilities. And when you take the right qualitative and quantitative workforce plan together with a long-term strategy of your company, it goes hand in hand, and you can create profit for your shareholders, growth, and more employment in a completely new shape with very motivated and excited people.
Ulrich, your comments always give me hope that there will be future jobs. But the reality is, in this transition phase over the past year, we have seen more job losses where companies have been under pressure. I want to get KU in here because clearly there's still a problem. And if you look at different markets, I mean, China, we've not seen the same level of descent that you've seen elsewhere from developed markets to emerging markets. And perhaps it's about optimism. You've got more millionaires and billionaires being created out of that country. People are still leaning into hope. Though if we look below the scenes, we can see there's still unevenness in employment and in pay. So why is China doing something right and the rest of the world is seemingly in turmoil?
Well, I think that this discussion so far has focused a lot on advanced economy problems. And it's interesting that we have so much focused on the trade disputes, and one of the factors driving the trade dispute is displacement, so-called displacement of manufacturing jobs in the U.S. perceived to be due to trade. But the truth is, it's mostly due to technology. Yes. But isn't the central problem, even more severe than the ones that we have spoken of, is how is the next developing countries going to emerge and even create a middle class if things can be manufactured for free now? China might very well be the last country that had been able to create a huge middle class simply by becoming an industrial powerhouse, manufacturing and exporting. There are many, many remaining developing countries that need to emerge, but technology is taking away those opportunities. So I think that is the central issue. However, coming back to China, I completely agree with what you said. China is an interesting country to look at in terms of at least middle income is still rising, first of all, and the quality of life is rising. But we are critical of the Chinese government for a variety of issues, the centralization and the mobilization of resources, but it's the mobilization of resources that are making people's lives better. It is infrastructure, rolling out massive amount of infrastructure, huge amounts of efforts done put into education. So human capital is one of the key drivers of China's growth. This requires not only coordination, but government resources. It requires amount of saving. And this is kind of China's development model, trying to export to the rest of the world, not as exporting a kind of, it's a kind of economic development model that focuses on infrastructure, focuses on human capital. Because if we look at what makes countries leap out of the middle income trap, it is these factors. It is technology, it is infrastructure, it is human capital. And we have to be fair to say that China has done very well.
Yes.
Can I add institutions into that as well? Because one of the other bricks that we haven't mentioned here, and if you rewind 5 years ago, we would have been talking about Brazil. This year, we've heard from the new president setting out his ambitions for his term in office. And I think he would probably put his country in the loser category after what we've seen, very deep downturn in that country. He's got an enormous challenge ahead. Do you think that Brazil could have a comeback moment? Will 2019 mark a turning point for that country?
I think that political institutions and the political economy, the functionings of that is very important. And China has its own particular structure of political centralization and economic decentralization that works very well. You mentioned Brazil. It's very interesting to see that despite there's huge amounts of criticisms on, let's say, China's One Belt, One Road and outward expansion policies, there are many, many emerging markets, including Brazil, including countries in Latin America, that are desperate to work with China because they can count on reliable Chinese investment and credit constantly flowing in for economic purposes. And so I think that despite the whole, context of criticism, if you really look into Southeast Asia, Eastern Europe, Latin American countries, there is much more scope to work with countries like China on that front.
The Bolsonaro buzz has certainly been evident in Davos. Question is whether it continues across the rest of this year. You've had the opportunity to meet with the new president. What do you make of his initiatives and whether he is the right man for the job to turn the economy around?
Yes, I have had the opportunity of meeting him yesterday. I think, number one, it's very good that he comes to Davos to put his message across. I have lived in Brazil and I have worked there, and there is a huge hope in Brazil about a significant change, given the previous corruption cases and the way the society was being, if you want, in a sense, asphyxiated. So people want to change. He represents that change. I think he has a very good economics team led by Paulo Guedes, very reputed economist. And he wants liberal economies. He wants to have a pro-market policy. So there are high hopes, number one. Second, society wants to change. I think he has a good team. So you have all the conditions for Brazil to really start progressing, as, by the way, the expectations in the market demonstrate. Still, on the other hand, the president only has a small representation in Congress, like 10%. His party represents only 10% of Congress, and Congress in Brazil is quite dysfunctional. There are obvious resistances in any country when you want to do reforms. So I think, on the other hand, we should not underestimate the size of the task, but I think that the first signs are positive, and there is high hope that Brazil will come out well with this political change.
The president is a busy man this week. No wonder he kept his speech fairly short. He's meeting with you. I know he's meeting with Joe Kaiser from Siemens, and he's also meeting with Uri. Yes. What's your view on Brazil for this year?
Yeah, we had a good dialogue yesterday. And if you look at Brazil, but got basically suffocated in the last years by a central government that has gone into a mammoth kind of dimensions of public servants. It has been slowed down by massive corruption and too much regulation. And they are basically addressing all 3 points, which I really welcome going forward as an industrialist. Brazil is a rich country in terms of natural resources. It is a large market, so there is no reason why it shouldn't be prospering. What does it take, and what did we listen, and what did we hear? What we heard is that deregulation will come, the reduction of government apparatus and size will be redeployed into education. The very complex duty and tariff situation will be deregulated, which is very welcoming for us as a global player that has about 3,000 people in Brazil, but we're also using our global supply chain, serving that we can really support the country in a completely different way. I think the younger people will have hope in this country with this agenda. The clarity and the simplicity of the agenda that was communicated is really welcome on the industrial side. I think it has been a long time that we had such a clear and simple, growth-oriented, country-oriented agenda. So altogether, the ambition to go towards a more market, decentralized, deregulated country is only to be supported. We play our role in that one. And it's interesting when you look at the investment pattern. We learned yesterday about 100 billion investments going into oil and gas, 100 billion going into the infrastructure sector. This will be a significant amount of monies that will be taken from the past central government spending on itself to drive growth in the country, which is good. We had a justice minister in the dialogue as well, and it was very, very encouraging to see how he has already gone the journey of addressing corruption, and it was probably one of the countries that needed it most, but also did the most. And they continue to go forward. So I see a Brazil that has the opportunity as one of the key markets to prosper in times when the rest of the world dampens. For us as a global player, we need to take these opportunities there very quickly to make sure if we have uncertainties in other markets that we can overall balance what's going on.
I want to get to David then on that note on what sort of world that emerging markets are operating in this year, because last year, as the Fed was lifting interest rates and you had concerns about financial conditions tightening, the US dollar was stronger. This is a headwind for many emerging markets, including Brazil. Does this year look any different?
Well, countries are facing a number of different, emerging market countries are facing a number of different conditions, whether it's the strong dollar, whether it has been the Fed normalization and the changes in capital market sentiment that have gone along with that, the trade tensions and so on. The countries that have been most exposed are the countries that have a fair amount of debt, including corporate debt, and where that debt is in dollars. And so they're vulnerable both to higher interest rates as well as to strong dollars. But I think we've seen that emerging market countries that have better managed their own domestic situations have been favored by the markets, and that unlike some past episodes, it's really been a very selective and fairly small amount of the emerging market world that's fallen into difficulty. Now, if the advanced economies stay on an even keel, that's good for everybody. If there's a recession at some point in the next 2 or 3 years, I think it becomes very problematic. And the already trade growth is not what it might be, and if that were to worsen, I think that would be a significant impediment. Just to say on Brazil, it's been a very long and difficult period for Brazil, and now is truly an opportunity to turn things around.
We'll leave it on that optimistic note because we're just out of time. We could continue the conversation, I think, for much longer. But thank you so much for the input this morning from David, Ulrich, KU, and Antonio. Thank you for your time here in the Sanctuary in Davos.
Thank you.
Please stay seated for our next discussion. CNBC's Tanya Breyer will be speaking with award-winning actor Matt Damon and Gary White, the co-founders of Water.org. Thank you.
Every time we meet, there is this holy feeling inside. Your energy's incredible, your heartbeat sounds so wonderful, and your new soul seems to shine so bright. Now I will run to lovely places, I will stand still when you're near. We could always leave a trace full of love without a fear. I'm breathing in, I'm breathing out.
morning, everyone. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I see a wonderful crowd here, and I'm delighted to introduce to you my guests, Matt Damon, the award-winning actor, co-founder of Water.org, and Gary White, his partner. Please welcome them.
All right.
All right. Well, Matt and Gary, welcome. Thank you so much for talking to me here this morning
Great to
on
be here.
CNBC. It's great to see you guys. Now, I first saw you here in 2014. And you've been back again. You were back again in 2017, I believe. What is it about Davos and the World Economic Forum that attracts you to come here?
Well, it's a great place to spread awareness about the work we're doing, and obviously there's a huge collection of very powerful, well-connected people here. So they're good people to talk to about the work we're doing, just so we can scale faster.
And Gary, obviously with Water.org, it's an initiative that you co-founded together in 2009. Over the years, how have you seen things change on the ground here at the Forum?
Well, I mean, here at the Forum, what we've seen is like a steady progression of conversations with different strategic partners that have worked with us, and those coming to fruition through the people that we serve, right? So we have been able to take the awareness that Matt's talking about that we've raised here and turn that into philanthropic capital, into funding, so that we can go out and have impact on the ground. And when we were in 2012, we had only reached about 1 million people with water and sanitation over the course of many years. And then from now, we're reaching about 1 million people every quarter through safe water and sanitation. And I think the boost that we
quickly into the work that we're doing with Water.org. And obviously what's different about us, which we've talked about over the years, is the model that we use is not a direct impact model, which is what most water foundations do, is they'll raise money to drill wells. And we have a microfinance model that Gary pioneered. Around the time we partnered, it was being piloted. And it's just a wonderful idea. Gary basically took the concepts that Muhammad Yunus pioneered around microfinance and applied them to water. And so our model is about making small loans, 90% of which go to women in the developing world. And the great thing about this hypothesis that Gary had that's now been borne out, we've given over 3 million loans at this point, and they pay back at 99%. So it's a really impressive model, and it's a real success story, and it's about the message that we bring and that we've proven is that the poorest people on the planet want to participate in solving their own problems. And if you just nudge the markets a little bit towards them, then they'll participate in their own solution. And that's been a
Yeah, and I think that what we see and the insight that we've gained is that poor people around the world are already paying huge amounts of money for water through these water vendors, or sometimes they're paying in terms of their time to walk and collect water. A woman I met outside the city of Manila in the slums there, Leonardiza, I was talking with her recently, and she was paying $60 every month to these water vendors who would sell this not even safe water, from tanker trucks. And so what she did, she took out a loan with one of our local partners so she could pay the connection fee. She could afford a couple of dollars a day, but she couldn't afford $300 to connect. And so she took out that loan, and now her loan payments and her water tariff combined are $10 a month. So you can see right there the power of this when we see the poor not as a problem to be solved through charity, but as a market to be served.
Right, they turn into customers, right, and then they gain agency, and so that's a real kind of game changing.
But do you feel there is a global water crisis?
Yes, of course.
Yeah.
Yes. And the crisis is felt most by, there's about 800 million people who don't have access to safe water. And what that means, particularly for women and girls, is, the water collection often falls on them. And so there are hundreds of millions of girls who are not in school because they're out collecting water. And so it's not just the kind of the senseless death, and there are about 1 million children who are dying every year completely preventably, right? I mean, this is something we solved in the West 100 years ago. I mean, just imagine if we cured cancer tomorrow and in 100 years people were still dying of it. It's unconscionable.
But that's the thing, Matt, because why ask and say, do you feel it's a crisis? Obviously it is. But for a lot of people in the West, they don't quite grab that concept, do they, Gary?
Well, yeah, that's
Well, they don't, and I think that we take it for granted, right?
Yeah.
Because water for us is safe and ubiquitous. We turn on a tap and it's there. But the water stress that's coming, and this is as much a climate change issue as it is a water issue, because so many people around the world already live in water stress. And with climate change, it's too much water in so many places and too little water in others. And the New York Times article just this past week talking about the glaciers melting. Those glaciers melting and refreezing every year, that's what gives like millions of people their water supply. And so what we're trying to say is we can use this approach of water credit and finance so people can develop that resilience, so that if they do have to drill a deeper well or they have to take other means to improve their water supply, they have the financial means to do that. And what we're seeing is it can actually move beyond philanthropy. Since we were here last time, we launched Water Equity. So that's the first ever impact investment fund manager focused on solving this crisis. And so now we can actually bring investors in. We have about $60 million of assets under management that we then use to make loans to scale up these microloans. And then investors get repaid and they get a distribution on top of that through accredited investing.
Is impact investing the way forward, do you think?
It's a huge part of it, yeah, without a doubt. And for us, we kind of came to this realization. It's funny because Gary's got 3 engineering degrees. I'm an actor. It's like...
But it's all about finance. What?
But, it's all about finance. And we've come to that after doing this for a long time. And we were in India probably 5 years ago. We were talking to some of our partners, and we asked them to identify the biggest bottleneck for them. And they all said, individually, right, in separate conversations, they all said access to affordable capital was their biggest roadblock, and that the demand was there. And in fact, the World Bank has identified 500 give somebody clean water for life, per person. So.
And you're giving investors good returns.
Exactly.
Yes.
Yeah, above our projections.
Above our projections, actually. Yes.
Good news. Do you feel, though, that there is a movement for investors and alike, and even consumers, that they want to invest with social responsibility?
That's a great question, and yes is the answer. And you really hear it here, and we've been having conversations. It's different from 4 years ago. Like these companies, and I'm sure you're seeing this too, they really are, and that's voice in this conversation. And are able to move these corporations. They want to be responsible to their shareholders, but also, as they say, to their stakeholders. I mean, that's something that we've heard a lot this week.
Do you think, though, that the water crisis, the clean act,
just help people, because it's not a relatable issue the way, cancer or AIDS, death, and, what Bono calls the stupid death, the completely preventable death. It's also about, if you're a girl and you're not in school because you're collecting water and you're fetching water, what does the rest of your life look like, right? And these conversations that we have all over the world with these kids who you ask them what they're going to do when they grow up, and they answer just like my girls, answered. Like, they have these hopes and these dreams, and they have this opportunity to live to their potential because their basic needs are met. And so they're in school and they're focusing on their futures. Absent that, they're just in this death spiral of poverty, and they're just trying to survive to the next day. And so their outcomes are just completely different.
Look, Matt, I have to ask you, because I know you're a father of 4 girls, and I remember talking to you, in Davos previously, and you talked about your own childhood, and your mother, who's a teacher, took you as a young child to places to ingrain that giving back into you. What was it personally for you that you thought, right, I've got to use my platform, I'm going to use my celebrity, I'm going to go out there and make a difference?
Well, I think a lot of it came from my parents, and yes, and that's a good memory you have it. Yes, my mother did take me to, to Mexico and to Guatemala, and I did get to see extreme poverty up close as a teenager, and that had a profound effect on me. And my wife and I are trying to do that with our kids, because, it's very hard as a child to understand the world outside of your own little neighborhood, and so that's a real privilege that we have to kind of. To share that with them, and just personally it's an odd thing to wake up with a platform, you know what I mean? And as you know, it's odd for people to suddenly know who you are, and I think it's a very intense and kind of personal question, but I felt like, I wanted to maximize the positive impact that I could have, and so I chose this issue because it's massively complex, it's interesting. It's hugely important. It undergirds all of these issues of extreme poverty, and nobody in the West is really talking about it, and so it felt like the right.
Well, and Matt, you always talk about it, and it's very solvable, right? That's what is all those things. Plus, we know how to get it done, and how do we catalyze the support to make that happen? And that's really one of the reasons why we're here, because we so believe that this can work. I mean, the fact you'll hear Bill Gates talk about this a lot, and Hans Rosling in his book Factfulness. It's like there's so much that's right with the world. We're not there yet, but it's much better than we think. In fact, more than 2 billion people have lifted themselves out of extreme poverty in the last 2 decades. And those are people who really want to improve their water and sanitation. And that's why, they're showing up. They're paying these costs now, what we call these coping costs, to those water vendors in their time. And that's about $300 billion a year in coping costs. So we believe that if we can just move the numbers around, the dollars around, so many more people can get access to water and sanitation. And here we really believe this because the concentration of wealth in this world has never been greater. Yeah. What was it you were talking about? The 26 richest people now?
That was in the Times this week.
It was, 26, but yeah.
26, yeah. I have the exact same wealth as the bottom 3 billion.
Right, and and how do we unleash that, right? What's the marginal utility of $1 more to those people relative to what they could be doing with somebody who needs water and sanitation?
But then you have that inequality, Gary, that causes all sorts of all of this. But what about governments? Should they be doing more?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, they can and they are. I mean, we're great, really grateful for our work with the government of India, for instance. They're doing so much.
Earlier, of course, about climate change and the effects. And, of course, one of the big topics here at Davos is tackling climate change as well as oceans and sustainability. But what happens when the US, as it's done, has pulled out of climate change and the most powerful nation in the world? How does that affect not only that, but the work that you're trying to do as well?
I mean, it's a big step in the wrong direction, obviously. But, our thoughts go to, obviously, the most vulnerable people will be the people most affected by that. And those are the people we're trying to get this access to. So hopefully, a lot of positive steps have been reversed, and hopefully we'll turn the ship back around in the other direction.
Well, I think on the climate change issue, what people don't realize is how much water supply is contributing to climate change. You look at California, for instance, 20% of all electricity used in California is used to pump and treat and move water. It's astounding, the carbon footprint of water. And then when you look at things like, well, I did some quick numbers the other day, right? We have to move 4 trillion tons of water every year. Think about the energy of making that happen. And I was comparing it to what, we're all tuned into Amazon 2-day delivery now and all the carbon footprint of that. And to move that same amount of weight with Amazon, you would have to get 300 shipments to your house every day to equivalent the weight of the water. So the carbon footprint of this is really enormous. So we have to see water not as this hidden thing that's kind of behind the curtains, but something that could be the low-hanging fruit in tackling climate change.
But there's so much worry, Gary, about climate change. That's one of the big topics. And because the US have pulled out, and the fact that they're not supporting it. And Matt, I've got to ask you, I remember sitting exactly here on the stage with you and Gary, and it was 2017, January, and I asked you the question about the newly elected President Trump, and you said, we've got to give him a chance. And I remember you saying that. How do you feel now?
Listen,
Wasn't meant to be funny.
What I said then and what I still feel is I root very strongly for the president of our country. We need him to do well. That's good for everybody. And obviously, I didn't vote for him. That's not a secret. For anybody who's ever heard me talk about anything, it's probably not a surprise. But that that doesn't mean I don't want what's best for the country. I mean, we're halfway through.
It might not be halfway through. You never know.
We could be almost all the way through. You never know. But no, I think every sensible person does root for the success of the American president, because obviously that has a huge effect on the entire world.
Would you ever consider going into politics?
Nope. No, thank you.
You're always very eloquent and passionate on the subject. You're at Harvard.
There are other wonderful people who are there's a great group of politicians up and coming that I'll be happy to support. And some ones that some of the people who've been around for a long time that I support.
Who would you like to support? You're saying that there are some that you would. Can you?
There's going to be a huge Democratic field. I mean, I love Joe Biden, and especially now, particularly with our institutions under such attack.
Yes.
I think it would be a great signal to the world if we put somebody who is established and very stable and very wise back in charge. Just to right the ship. But look, there's this huge field of up and coming, people who are, in California we have, Kamala Harris, who I think is absolutely brilliant, and I would love to see her someday be the president of the United States. And if that happened in 2020, I'd be very happy with that too. Yeah.
And when you travel the world with water.org and you're on the ground and you're trying to do the work that you're doing, do people understand the challenges coming from an America that has become more nationalistic?
Well, what I see, we were just in Indonesia last fall together, is that people can distinguish between the American people and kind of the government, right? And in fact, you traveled to Central America a lot back, when you were younger, and I was there in the 80s. And yet, we had this huge thing going on there with the Contras. And yet, when people would see me, they would disassociate like what our government is doing for me, and they see us as kind of the hope to message to individuals that, yes, we are still a global family, and despite governments that kind of come and go, they understood the connection that we were trying to make between the American people and the support that they were giving. I remember one time in Honduras with this group of people that were benefiting from one of our early projects, and one of the gentlemen in the back of the room stood up and said, "Is it a law that in America you have to come and help us with things like this with water projects?" Because he couldn't kind of comprehend. It's like, you mean you're here just because you care? And like, yeah, that's what it's all about. And so this is a way for us to connect the American people with others around the world much more directly.
And how far away are we, do you think? I mean, we have the UN Sustainable Development Goals. A lot of people are talking about 2020 as being such an important turning point, and also 2030. But how far do you think, you've been on the ground now with water.org, how far away are we for clean access to clean water and sanitation for all?
So that's great. So our mission statement at water.org, literally the mission statement of our organization is we envision a day when everyone on Earth can access safe water and sanitation, and we envision that in our lifetime. Mm-hmm. So that, of course, raised the question as we were sitting in this McKinsey boardroom 10 years ago, going, whose life are we talking about?
Yeah, exactly.
Who's the youngest and healthiest person in the room? But no, we do, because as Gary was saying before, and what we would like everyone to leave with is the understanding that this is solvable, yes. Right? And so it's just about putting the solutions in place and the will to do that and engagement with the issue.
Yeah, and I think we can sprint. I think by 2030 we can get this done. I mean, the Sustainable Development Goal number 6 is all about water and sanitation. Yes. And the key thing about that is the price tag for that is enormous. It's about $1 trillion between now and then to get these services implemented and maintained. And so, again, that circles us back to, like, why should we be hopeful when there's such a huge price tag? It's because all that money that's needed is in the system. And how do we get smarter? How do we innovate? That's what we do at water.org all the time, is like, what's the next thing? What's the next piece of leverage that we can get? Because if we wake up every morning and see that $1 trillion price tag, we know we have to do this smarter and more efficiently all the time.
And shining a light, too. Matt, were you, at one point you were doing something with Ben Affleck, and weren't you creating a film or called Thirst? Or Thirst
what?
A documentary together? Or it was called Thirsty, or I read about...
Oh, on Thirst. Oh, yes. Well, yeah, I have obviously we have a company together, so sorry. I didn't, it's hard. It's been hard to find crossover in film.
In film.
In film,
yes.
Yeah. It's interesting, like, because the issue is so complex, there are a lot of documentaries about it, and I think that's probably the best way to address it. But, in film, you'd have to do it obliquely to kind of follow the narrative structure, the 3-act structure of a movie. It would be kind of hard to tackle an issue this big, unless you were just doing it as a documentary.
Well, you have executive produced a series for Netflix, I believe. Would you consider something for Netflix? I mean, they've just been nominated for Oscars. They've just come out as an Oscar winner yourself. Do you think that's the way forward for film?
Netflix? I mean, it's the Wild West there now. They're putting a lot of money behind a lot of things, and so yeah, it's a great place to work right now. And I mean, I'll work for any studio that's got a good movie. I'm a freelancer, so.
And just finally, what is your vision now? What is the message that you want to put across here for water.org? Gary, I'll start with you.
I think that this problem is solvable,
yeah.
And it can be solved in our lifetime, and it's very actionable. I mean, we do need that additional philanthropic capital. That's why we show up at Davos. Like I said, that additional 20 million could mean water for a billion people. And so that's the message, that it's solvable, we can do it, but we need to rally the support and direct the philanthropic as well as the social impact investing capital to unleash the power in that to serve humanity with safe water.
And Matt, how will you unleash that power?
Well, by doing things like this, by spreading the word, and it's really, when you start helping people understand the issue and they start telling people, it's really incalculable, the amount of impact that you can have. And ultimately, the more people who get involved and engaged, the quicker we'll solve it. So I would echo what Gary said, that it is solvable, but it's gonna take engagement from everybody.
Matt Damon, Gary White, thank you so much for joining me today. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Wonderful.
You're the best. Thank you.
Your appreciation for Matt Damon and Gary White.
Places, I will stand still when you're near. We could always leave a trace, full of love, without a fear. I'm breathing in, I'm breathing out. The world was made for us to find a new dimension now. Whoa, I'm breathing in, I'm breathing out. The world was made for us to make it beautiful somehow. Whoa, I'm breathing in, I'm breathing out.
Welcome everyone, please take a seat. We're about to begin our next discussion. Please stay seated. We're about to begin our next discussion. Welcome everyone, please take a seat. We're about to begin our next discussion.
Well, certainly a hard act to follow, Matt Damon, but I have a man who could dress you and have you ready for a Hollywood red carpet. So let's get into discussion around online fashion and disruption and how technology is changing the industry. Joining me now here in the Sanctuary in Davos is Federico Marchetti, who is the CEO of Yoox Net-a-Porter. Nice to see you here in Davos.
Thank you.
I want to talk a little bit about disruption because a lot of companies here on the ground are concerned about how quickly they need to move with all of the changes coming at them. And if I look at your business, you've always had speed. You've been a quick mover. You've identified where there have been opportunities and quickly moved your business forward. And many people might be thinking, well, this is a new company, right? But you've been around beginning in 1999 in an industrial estate in Bologna. So tell us about how you evolved as the company.
Yeah, I started almost 2 decades ago, and I started as an entrepreneur from scratch. So I came back from my university, and I had this idea of the two worlds of luxury and the web converging one day, and it was 1999. So it was a little bit ahead of time, and I went to a venture capitalist. So I raised the first tranche of money, and I started by myself. And I remember that I started in only 3 months. So the speed is probably back from the early days, because I had to start in order to get the second tranche of investment. And in 3 months, I put everything together. And that was the beginning.
It's quite different when you're talking about an outlet business, though, isn't it? Getting some of the samples, some of the product that doesn't sell from the designers, to now having a huge online business right at the forefront of luxury. That's quite an evolution.
Yeah, but the vision was, from the beginning, was to be the leader in online luxury. So that the first page of my business plan that I drafted in 1999, I remember in my apartment in Milan during the night when I was finishing at work. I was coming back and I was drafting, and I came up with a name, and I came up with the business plan. And the first page has always been, Yoox will be the leader in online luxury. And I took it step by step. Now I'm a builder, I'm an entrepreneur. So I started from the off-season, and then I added the online flagship stores in 2005. The first one was Armani.com that we launched in 2007, and powered by Yoox. So basically we leverage on all the infrastructure and technology and logistics that we have put together for Yoox. We also rented it to Armani. And then I added in season, and then we did the merger with Net-a-Porter, and then currently we're owned by Richemont, and we see another opportunity in terms of watches and jewelry.
Can I throw AI pioneer into the descriptions as well? Because a lot of companies are building AI, they're buying AI, and they're making it fit for purpose in their own businesses. You have just launched a collection designed using artificial intelligence, 8 by Yoox. Can you explain how computers are now shaping fashion?
Yeah, I mean, we try to, I mean, we are at the forefront of innovation, and we tried so far in the last 19, 20 years to be the first one to do something. Now, so 3 years ago, we started with the omnichannel. So, for example, with Valentino, to combine online with offline. And it's a big, complex project, and so we are really at the forefront of innovation for omnichannel. In terms of AI, with the 8, which is a 8 in Italian, so it's the number. It's a collection that is developed using data, because obviously, like, we have 3 million customers, over 2 billion revenues per year. So we have a lot of data in terms of luxury consumption worldwide, because we are in 180 countries. And so we absorb all the data, also external data coming from social media, from Google, from everything. So it's an algorithm, and the algorithm come up with some suggestion in terms of styles. Then the product team, based on this information, develop the collection. So it's a combination between man and machine, because I always believed that that I've never been a fanatic about only man or only machine. I always believed in a good balance between man and machine. And actually, the name of Yoox in 1999 was based on this balance, because it's the 2 chromosomes, Y and X, so the DNA of humans, together with the 00 of the binary code, which is the DNA of technology, all together. And this combination between man and machine has always been like the fil rouge during my career because, for example, the first website was not as sleek, as efficient as Amazon, but I wanted the first website to have a soul for the simple reason that we sell and we entertain our customers with luxury. And luxury is all about craftsmanship, it's tangible, it's warm, and so we're not selling commodities, we're selling luxury. So we're selling and we are conveying emotions.
I gather you are a passionate human supporter, if I can put it that way. We're early days talking about humans versus machines, but this is an experiment. While you might be supportive of the human component and why that's relevant in the luxury space, can you see a way forward for the fashion industry to use all the data that they're getting, use an algorithm, and cut humans out of the process altogether?
I don't think so. In the luxury industry, this will never happen.
What about the cheaper end of the fashion industry, where it's all about cost?
It could be like that in fast fashion, this will happen quicker. But let's say in our industry, I believe that we'll always find the balance in terms of craftsmanship and artificial intelligence. I bring you an example. We have developed also a kind of artificial intelligence stylist. So what is it? It's like we have 20 years of styling of products, now to put together the perfect outfit for our customers. And so we have a huge amount of data in terms of style. And this machine is learning the style from our stylist and is suggesting outfits also to our personal shoppers that they interact in their turn with our customers. So they have information and tools, but in the end, the final point of touch with the customers is always human. Same story with the packaging. We have amazing logistics center, state-of-the-art with robots going around and so on, but in the end, the packaging and tying the bow is made by humans. And so this made by humans, I think, will stay in the luxury industry because it's part of its DNA.
I'm naturally curious about how the AI line 8 is connecting with customers. Is it outselling some other product lines?
It's going very well, and it's made of essentials. So we don't pretend to become fashion designers at all. So we are just serving our customers with items that they cannot find in our wardrobe, in our immense wardrobe. And also on Mr. Porter, which is another brand that we have Net-a-Porter, Mr. Porter, Yux, and The Out. And we have 4 brands, and then we have the division, which is Valentino.com, powered by Yux Net-a-Porter. So on Mr. Porter also we have a line on label that is using and leveraging on our data. So it's not only 8, but it's also Mr. P. That's how it's called.
AI is a learning...
One is for men and women, and one is only for...
Right. AI is a learning process. So what have you seen in the evolution of the algorithm and the AI so far from where you started versus where you are now?
You know, it's fun to think that in 99 I was probably the first or one of the first to come up with the homepage for luxury products, in a way. So I'm not saying that I was the inventor, but I was definitely among the first. And now, 20 years later, I'm seeing that this homepage won't exist anymore. So someone that has invented it is also now disrupting it, because each customer of the 3 million customers that they are surfing and having fun on our websites and our brands will have their own homepage, fully personalized. And that's where, for example, artificial intelligence is super important and probably cannot be replaced by humans. Because with this huge amount of data, in order to give a personalized experience to our customers, you can only leverage on data. It's not possible to do it.
Welcome, everyone.
A huge factory for technology. So everything is, the engine is our own proprietary engine, and that is developed constantly because we are at the forefront of innovation, so we need to do it by ourselves.
I wonder around the benefit of speed from AI, because traditionally we have seen fast fashion evolve, for instance, where they've moved their supply chains. They can actually have the product on the shelves much quicker than the traditional models, which used to be very seasonal. Now with AI combined with online shopping, what sort of speed are you getting because you have more access to the data trends, whether it's a downturn in one country, China, for instance, that they've stopped buying as much product, where they've altered some of their buying habits because of the macroeconomic backdrop? Are you getting those trends quicker than you might have had in the past, so therefore you can respond?
Definitely, there's a component in AI which is a prediction, which helps you to be quicker on certain things. Service is also important. So not only like information, but also the tangible service to the customer. So like we have same-day delivery in London, in New York, in Hong Kong, soon in Milan with the opening of the new logistics center in Milan, soon in Dubai with the opening of the logistics center in Dubai. So I think speed is important for the customers. Without, again, not being too exaggerated. So I don't believe in the 60-minute speed, because we're selling, again, a Gucci bag. We're not selling a bottle of milk. And so I think that customers can wait for the same-day delivery for a Gucci bag, and they don't need it in 60 minutes like a bottle of milk. So I think, again, it's a question of balance, of finding a good speed in terms of service, prediction of the new trends of the customers, and I would say a human touch in everything that we do in order to serve our customers better.
Well, I've opened the conversation to China. Let me ask you about how the luxury customer is faring as we enter 2019. The trade spat continues with the United States. The economy has started to weaken. There have been reports that Apple prices for the iPhones have been slashed in China. Are you seeing any impact on the consumer behavior from Chinese customers?
We are still very small in China, so it's in the future it's definitely an upside for us.
But growing, right, with deals with Alibaba and Tmall?
Definitely we see an upside for us in China. I have to say that I was quite lucky and probably a little bit thinking ahead of time when in 2006 I started to put together a task force around mobile commerce. 2006 was just to put it in the context, was I think 1 year before the launch of the iPhone, the first iPhone. But I thought at that time that the customers, because that's what I think every day when I wake up, so what the customers want, I thought that the customers one day were going to shop on the phone, which is, I mean, it's a very simple idea. And so since 2006, we've been developing mobile commerce, like with the huge investments in technology, people, and so on. And in China, for example, mobile penetration is one of the highest. So we found ourselves, compared to other international retailers, let's say a little bit ahead of time. And so that, therefore, we are in a high growth market. And so like and we are global. So like China, Italy, UK, US is our first market. So any, let's say, little disruption in terms of trends doesn't influence our business model because we're very much diversified.
So as a man who can see trends, let me ask you about voice. So while we might all be shopping on our phones now, do you see a situation down the track where there's more fragmentation and people are shopping using speakers, using voice?
Thank you for asking this question. I think we launched on Nukes this functionality, I think 4 or 5 years ago. And it was around color. So you could, given that Nukes is showcasing not only fashion, but also design and art, you were going on Nukes and say, show me what you have in red. And it was putting together both Valentino red dress, together with a beautiful chair of Sotzas, together with a beautiful painting of Damien Hirst in red, or Fontana, which was amazing in terms of visualization. And I've been in China like in December, last time I was in December, and so they use all these apps for translation. And so I was amazed that, for example, the taxi driver, I was telling the address of Alibaba, and in order to communicate the two of us, everything was very smooth thanks to these apps that they use the translation. So I think it is a trend, that we have, let's say, spotted a little bit ahead of time, and we're definitely working on it.
Where does that leave you as somewhat of an independent versus some of the big tech giants? Because from what I understand, you put in a request, you make a search item, show me or give me the options for a new sweater. The first option that could come up could be incentivized or could be driven by Amazon. It may not directly take me to one of your offerings. Are you concerned that competition gets altered because of speakers and who's owning that software and hardware?
I mean, competition has always been there, and we definitely watch out competition. We try to watch the competitors, let's say, from the rear window. So we try not to follow too much, but always to watch. And we are, let's say, very much focused on our industry, which is luxury, only luxury, meaning luxury fashion, and now also hard luxury, which is watches and jewelry. So I have to say that being in this niche, which is a niche, but it's a big niche, and it's growing, is making us the leader, and also like we feel that we are also protected by the brand equity of the brands that we represent, because in the last 20 years, what we've been doing, we've been always focused on protecting and nurturing our brands, now that we work with, from Valentino to Balenciaga. And this is an important part of our job. So not only we think about customers, final customers every day, but we think also how to protect the quality. And for example, the same with the joint venture with Alibaba, that's what we're planning to do. So to bring the same quality also through Alibaba Luxury Pavilion in China.
A number of the big luxury players increasingly want to go it alone. So many have been happy to sell their wares on your site and on others. And there was an announcement about e-commerce going back in-house, the ending of by Kering, the big owner of Gucci and many other labels, ending its joint venture with UX Net-a-Porter. What impact does that have when you also have another big fashion house, LVMH, that's got their own site? Are we seeing more fragmentation where it's almost an evolution? They're saying, well, why are we giving over this potential upside on e-commerce to a player like you when we can take it in-house and do it ourselves? People know where to find our own website these days.
I think we need to differentiate the answer between monobrand experience and multi-brand experience. So in terms of monobrand, as I said, I've invented, in a way, or at least I was one of the first to invent this monobrand experience, so Armani.com powered by UX Net-a-Porter in 2005, 2006, so more than 10 years ago. So obviously we have evolved this model, and as I mentioned before, we have evolved with a new model called Next Era for Valentino that is completely and seamlessly integrating online with offline. In order to do that, it's so complex behind the scene, because you need to be very simple with the customers to let them enjoy the experience. The simpler you are with the customers, the more complex you are behind the scene.
Right.
And in terms of technology, it has been like a huge work from our side in the last 2 years to perform and to put together this model. And so I think that we will have a long life with this new model of Next Year in terms of monobrand experience. Even if obviously the temptation to bring it in-house is always there, because it's normal that people want to do as much as they can, and it's totally normal. And then we help them also to get there. So we're not protective, because it's part of the, let's say, of the model to little by little also give the brand more and more independence. On the multi-brand, Net-a-Porter and Mr. Porter, for example, I mean, they are the place to be, in the sense of not only distribution, not only in terms of channels, not only in terms of sales, that, I mean, they are quite big also in terms of sales, also for the brands that we stock. But they are also very important in terms of content, and in terms of editorialism, and in terms of marketing. So that's what I mean, the place to be, because, I mean, if you are a brand, you want to be on Net-a-Porter represented. So in a way, Net-a-Porter or Mr. Porter for men are equally important, and sometimes more important than what was a fashion magazine in the past. And that's why for brands, even if they internalize part of the experience on the monobrand, they will always want to be on the multi-brand, fully represented with content and commerce.
I'm interested in how you would characterize the challenge for aggregators. There's been a huge trend in recent years for a bunch of new websites to pop up, whether that's luxury or across the rest of the fashion landscape. But, you know, you've mentioned some of the service aspects of Net-a-Porter. You get the box, for instance, the ribbon, it's delivered nicely, there's an ability to return it very easily. All that is part of the service, and then you get the experience of the content on the website. So it's selling you a story. Is there a moat now, bigger moat between you and some of the other newcomers in the aggregator space? Has it gotten any harder, or do you think the challenges are coming just as thick and fast as they have in recent years?
We try to keep, let's say, our gap. No, so to continue to innovate for the customers. So not innovation for the sake of it, but innovation for the customers. That's very important. So we try not to waste time on innovation per se. And I think that the model itself is tailored for luxury. And so as a generalist, it will be very difficult to replicate our model because everything that we do is based on luxury. So from the service, the packaging, as you mentioned, which is like a kind of a childlike experience. Now, when you get myself, when I'm ordering, I'm still thrilled to receive the packaging, which is a kind of a gift for myself, which is a kind of when we're children for Christmas. And let's say the attention to detail in everything that we do, the content, the edit, the curation. So everything is tailored for luxury. And that's why we are so much focused on that I think this is definitely a competitive advantage vis-a-vis any other generalist.
What jumps out of one of the big conversations here around Davos has been a trade fight. Each country is seeking to better their terms, having more product and more services made in their own country. But yet in future, you say we may not be talking about made in Italy. It might be made by humans. That could be where the premium element stands on some of the tags that are sewn into clothing. Just explain how quickly you see that transition coming and why this fight around trade by country levels might be an old fight to be having.
Yes, I mean, in the past we were used to the label of origin to be like the representation of the quality of the product, so made in Italy, British made, designed by Apple in Cupertino, in California, German automobiles, Swiss watches. I mean, obviously I need to mention it. And I believe that, as I said, like in terms of craftsmanship, AI will be important, but we will make choices. At least I've made choices across the last 20 years to find the right balance between AI and technology and craftsmanship that will continue to be important. And that's why Made by Humans will be like kind of probably of a label that luxury customers, that they are more and more, for example, looking at bespoke products or personalized products. I think they will be definitely a label of the future Made by Humans because it's part of the craftsmanship.
This is just going to be down to marketing though, isn't it? Because I have covered a story where I had to choose between a painting that was created by a human and a painting that was created by a computer. And with a decent art background, I sort of knew what I was looking for, which was something a little bit predictable. And I got close to picking it. But most people who had done the experiment before could not tell the difference. Same with clothing. The human eye is not going to be able to detect what's made by humans and what's made by computers. Therefore, it's purely going to be down to the marketing and what you put on that label, isn't it?
I don't think so. I think it goes to genuineness and authenticity rather than just marketing.
But that's value system. So you're telling me, you know, this is made by humans, and if I as a human care about the fact that it's made by humans protecting jobs, then I might be more inclined to buy that. But that's down to the marketing. It's about communication from the brand to tell me how to think and what to buy.
The complexity of the product. So I think that in terms of certain products and certain creativity will always continue to be made by humans. So, for example, from the little artisan in Italy called Lorenzi that is, let's say, making all these beautiful objects that, I mean, a machine cannot come up with these ideas, and also with the execution of it. So I think there will be a differentiation in terms also of the product itself. So not only marketing and not only label, but also the product and the complexity of it and the creativity behind it.
While we have some time left, I want to get into how you could be disruptive, because it's very clear at this point that tech companies, innovators like yourself, are moving much quicker than the regulators. So if we take the example of Amazon, for instance, it has its own product, it sells third-party items, it gathers all the information from those different companies that it's selling for, and then it creates its own brands using that information in direct competition with a lot of the product it's selling. Very similar to what you're now doing with 8. You're getting the data from those customers that you're selling for and externally. Isn't there a conflict? And could the regulators at some point step in and say, no, you need separation of these business lines?
No, I don't think there's a conflict because, as I mentioned, we don't pretend to be fashion designers. So we believe in our job to be very special and specialized. So the line and the collection that we're developing is made of essentials. So we are not putting together like a fashion show at the next Milan or New York Fashion Week, and this will never happen. So we're just putting together, using data, what the customers want in terms of essentials. Because in our, let's say, assortment of products, this is the missing part.
Many luxury labels sell what they would believe would be an essentials or basics range too. And if you assume that there is a finite amount that a consumer has to spend, maybe not now as we have fairly decent economic times, but perhaps when we have much slower economic growth, there will be a finite amount of spend for each consumer. You're competing for the very same dollar, very same euro, very same pound with this line.
But this will be true then also for traveling and for food, to go to the restaurant, or to go for a nice holidays in the Maldives. So this is we're all competing then for the same.
So you don't expect the regulators to step in at any point in time?
No, I don't think so. Also because we're talking about a very, very tiny percentage of the whole business model.
Can I ask you a little bit about how it is being parked in a much bigger stable now, Richemont? So prior to that, you're almost more of an independent company, a tech challenger, a luxury player, but now you're parked in one of the big fashion houses. Does that muddy the waters a little bit for doing business with other key players? For instance, I mentioned Kering, I mentioned LVMH. These are all listed companies that all compete against each other for investor dollars. Does that mean that there's a bit of a conflict and makes it a little bit more challenging on some of the partnerships because you're now parked in the Richemont house?
No, because the company is run as an independent branch, an independent company.
And the brands, the companies get that? They haven't raised any issues?
So it's a neutral platform, so completely neutral, so we treat all the brands the same. I'm an entrepreneur that has always been independent in the last 20 years, so I'm also part of this independence. And I haven't seen any brand was worried about this part so far.
Let's close out this panel on a fun note. Everyone's in the app right here in Davos, and you're the man with all the data around what customers are buying and what they should be buying. What are the big fashion trends for 2019? What should we be buying?
I mean, a big fashion trend currently is sneakers. That is probably going on for a while.
This is not helping me out. This is not helping my wardrobe.
in terms of product, but in terms of, let's say, more experience, I have to say that what we are really working on, with a lot of investment, and we believe that it will be more and more the future, it is a completely seamless integration between online and offline. And so if you are a customer buying from Valentino shop in Fifth Avenue, you are the same that probably you will find the Valentino.com as appealing, because maybe you will never have the bad experience when you get into a shop not to find what you want. Because maybe in that shop you don't have the inventory, but having on the other side the global inventory that is accessible from all the customers around the world is what you want. So never a product sold out. And that's the final and the ultimate experience.
You're not helping me out here. Last time I asked this question, it was to a Salvador tailor who told me soft blue ties were going to be the thing. I need a specific item.
Specific item is the biggest trend is sneakers, but also for women and not only for men. Also the big brands are focusing on that more and more. And in the end, we are also spotting not only the big brands, but also we are nurturing young brands, which is part of our, let's say, proposition to the customers, because we are curators. And so I think the customers, including China, they are focusing more and more also on unknown brands that they could be, for example, eco-friendly. And this is one of the biggest trends that we see ourselves. YOOX started in 2009 by stocking eco-friendly fashion called Yuxigen. And now, we are also Net-a-Porter is doing a lot on that. And we see that customers are more and more interested in this trend of, let's say, products that are eco-friendly.
I think we're still waiting for our next panel, so I might squeeze in one final question that I haven't had a chance to ask you, something I've been curious about. There have been huge missteps over the last couple of years by certain brands in their communication, something that might go viral. And the one that really jumps out in 2018 was around Dolce & Gabbana. Worst possible execution and timing, a conversation that went viral. And if you think of where the trends are at, very customized, very fashion conscious at the luxury end, which is why Gucci had done so well and why Dolce & Gabbana was set up to also compete very effectively in this space. But the way that conversation went was very negative for China. In fact, effectively destroyed the entire Chinese strategy. What do you do when you have a product like that on your site and you have product that you want to sell? How quickly can you respond to preserve the relationship with the designer, but also where you're not left holding onto inventory stock or have sort of a negative impact on your business?
So our strategy has always been global, as I mentioned, 180 countries delivering with multiple logistics centers, I think in total 8 or 9. So we are very, let's say, very good in terms of service, thanks to this. But also to be very local in terms of, even the name of YOOX that I've invented in '99, I didn't want to have an Italian name, or I didn't want to have an American name or a Japanese name. I wanted to have a name coming from Mars, like YOOX. So everybody in different countries were perceiving YOOX as their own country, coming from their own country. So the Japanese in Japan and the American. So that's what we do in terms also in terms of assortment. So we try to be very local and try to be as close as possible to the final customers. So even if we are such a global company with over 2 billion euro in revenues, each market is different. And so China is different from the rest of the world. And that's also the same applies to Dolce & Gabbana.
Thank you so much for your time here in the Sanctuary in Davos. Federico Marchetti, thank you for joining us.
Thank you. Thank you.
Welcome everyone, please take a seat. We're about to begin our next discussion. Please stay seated. We're about to begin our next discussion.
I think you never listen to me, and you never understand how I wish you could look into me and know exactly what I meant. And I'd go on talking to you, baby, now.
Good morning again, everyone. I'm just going to take this opportunity to flesh out impact and investing for you because it may not be on everybody's radar. So I just want to get your headspace into what this sphere of investing is before we introduce the panel to you. Now, can investors save the planet? Can big money step in and save the planet? Impact investing combines both the heart of philanthropy and the analytics of traditional investment and is one of the fastest growing areas of asset management. Now, if you just think in 2018, how much money was motivated into this sector? $228 billion in impact investing assets is roughly the number that has been crunched. This was double that of the previous year. So just to get a sense of how much momentum there is in impact investing. But are there benefits for all of us if investors increasingly want to do more with their money for good? Economists argue that we will need more than government intervention and philanthropy to achieve the UN Sustainable Development Goals of reducing poverty and tackling climate change. If it became more widespread, so if impact investing really got even more momentum, with private capital involved, we could fill that gap potentially. Do we need more simplicity, though, when it comes to impact investing, consistency, and a better message to achieve all of this? So on that note, let me ask the panellists to come and join us on stage, and I will introduce you to them. So first up, next to me, Axel Weber, Chairman of UBS, Rob Capito, President and Director of BlackRock, Christiana Figueres, former Executive Secretary, UN Framework for Convention on Climate Change, and founding partner, Global Optimism, and Stephanie von Friedeberg, who is the International Finance Corporation Chief Operating Officer and Vice President for Operations at World Bank. I want to start the conversation off with impact investing, where we are in 2019, because last year we were sort of getting to grips with what it was. It was a bit of a buzzword around investment circles. How have we moved, and what is the opportunity around impact investing in 2019, Axel?
Well, so we had a number of meetings, both with the public sector and within the private sector, on how we can actually continue the journey, which we talked about last year, in moving impact investment from being a niche area to mainstreaming it. And I think one of the areas where we had very good engagement in the official sector, and we made some announcements in Bali, was really about, with, of course, our friends here from the IFC and others, to really start with defining what it is, basically the structure and the definitions and how we can really, prevent this market from being misused as it's in its infancy still. And so we need very clear definitions, very clear understanding of what impact investment is and what impact investment is not. And I think for the industry, this should end in a voluntary set of rules to which the industry adheres so that we can avoid mislabeling. And I think the official sector will play a very key role in developing from the start the branding of these type of impact investing products. And financial firms like Rob's and mine, we're very happy to work with the official sector in developing that market and mainstreaming it.
To summarise, it sounds like baby steps is what's transpired over the past year.
No, actually, very important foundations. I think before you can develop a market and move it to a more deeper, more liquid market, you have to define the market infrastructure. You have to do the financial plumbing before you actually will see any flows through these pipelines. And so what we're doing at the moment is getting the plumbing right, rather than continue to plumb once you already use the pipeline. So getting the plumbing right now is important. It's still in its infancy, but I think it's developing fast. There's a huge financing gap we need to close, but getting the plumbing right from the start is very important. And then we can build on markets, we can add derivative markets, we can develop financial infrastructure and mainstreaming, but you have to get the start right.
Stephanie, is that how you would describe the starting point in 2019 for impact investing?
Well, I would actually first take a step back. So impact investing, as we measure it, has increased fivefold over the last 4 years. So we're at 228 million. The thing about that number is that 75% of it still comes from specific impact funds and development financial institutions. So we've made a little bit of progress, but not nearly enough. I do believe, and if you look at what we did with the Equator Principles, so 15 years ago, we took our environmental and social standards and said, how do we pull these out of project finance and give them to our financial institutions so that as we push deeper and deeper into markets, we're bringing environmental and social criteria with us. And it was a baby step. But that baby step has grown to a point where we have 190 financial institutions who have joined the Equator Principles, and it's an institution on its own. So very much like Axel said, we've got to start at the foundational principles, get the framework, and then grow from there.
Christiana, do you want to jump in here? Where do you think we start out 2019 on impact investing?
Well, I guess I would agree that it's important to get the plumbing and the definitions and everything right. And at the same time, it's not a but. And at the same time, I'm seized with the urgency of actually moving forward. Because when you think of the infrastructure that is going to go in, both into industrialized countries to renovate old and aging infrastructure, as well as in developing countries to create new infrastructure, there's going to be $90 trillion that go into that over the next 10 years. And many of those decisions are already being taken. So a decision to go in today with building a coal plant is going to have emissions for the next 50 years. So I'm afraid, my dear friends, that we have to fly the plane and change the tires at the same time, because we cannot wait 2, 3, 4, 5 years to figure out exactly what we're going to do. I would argue we need to find those areas that are actually bridging areas for investment where we have some experience already investing, where we can test out the models of impact investment and go there while we are still perfecting the plumbing and the definition that I totally agree with. But I don't think that we can stop. And so for me, two areas that are really, really urgent are infrastructure, because that needs to be done ASAP, and also what happens with cities? Why cities? Most of the infrastructure that is going to go in is actually infrastructure that is under the purview of cities. And certainly public sector investing usually goes through national governments with a sovereign guarantee. I don't see as much private sector investment going in impact investments, certainly into cities that have all of those infrastructure transition needs urgently. They know what they need to be doing, but they don't have access, in part because we still don't know how to do it. So I would ask the experts in the sector, how can we solve this? Please don't tell me that we have to wait 5 years. We can't. We have the urgency. How do we bring, how do we square this circle?
Rob, let's get to you, because you're often the biggest investor in the room at BlackRock, and you have huge ambitions to be the global leader in sustainable investing. We've just had a conversation that set out the scene for impact investing as you get more involved in this space. Does it concern you that there are growing pains, that the industry still has a lot to work out around the framework, or are you going straight in and you're accelerating in and you'll just grow with the industry and just tackle some of those issues as they are confronted?
Well, let me try to put together my thoughts on this. Is that, first of all, we manage money on behalf of millions of individuals and institutions around the globe. It's not BlackRock's money. So I advise them on where they can make a good return on their money, where it's safe, and where they can invest in the future for their retirement and other things that they want to invest in. So there is absolutely no question that there is a need to have impact investing, sustainable investing, but there isn't exactly the right pipe to get the money from those clients into a form or a product that could then distribute it into the appropriate places. So infrastructure investing is something that people really believe in, but there have to be infrastructure projects that people can show that this is what we need to raise the money for. So we need to connect the pipes, and each different organization seems to have come up with their own indices or their own way of deciding what is more important than another, and try to convince people that they have the right companies to invest in. We need to organize that. Believe it or not, the most important thing is simplicity and convenience to attract this money. And I would applaud firms like UBS, who've actually just written an incredible report, and it's about simplicity and awareness. So you have to start somewhere. So I would consider ourselves an enabler. So last night, we filed with the SEC the first money market fund, and it's called LEAF. It's Liquid Environmentally Aware Fund. And what this is a money market fund where we can identify the companies that are doing the right things, that are making an impact, that are taking climate control very seriously, that are taking sustainability very seriously. And those are going to be the companies that we are going to invest in. And then we're going to talk to investors about this is the right way to move your money. The performance will show because it's a money market fund, so it's short. So it starts to get people to think about moving their cash into an environmentally aware. And we're going to step up to the plate and actually be the first people to take 5% of the fees that we make on that, and we're going to invest that in carbon offsets. And we're also going to take a percentage of that and give that to the World Wildlife Fund. So we're taking a step in working from an advisor side, trying to bring in money from our clients, so private money going into those companies. And that will show that who it is that's making an impact. We think that there'll be performance on those, which will encourage more and more people to come in. We also, simplicity. The most simplistic product in the marketplace in the last 5 years has been ETFs. We created a stable of sustainable core iShares, which is our brand, in order to, again, attract people, create awareness, simplicity, and move money. So we agree the need. We agree that it has to be simple, but we got to create the pipe. It's not that hard to do, and we're creating the sense of urgency, which you're talking about.
Right.
And I think you'll see over the next several months, it'll start to blossom. People will get very excited about it, and I think that will then, we can add on many other types of products that people can invest in. But I want to say what UBS has helped. This is really important because they reach a lot of important clients. And I sort of take exception that it's the millennials. All generations are interested in this and want to participate. And I might say that our generation, and before you get to millennials, actually has a little more money to make an impact right now.
Right.
So the urgency is now, not to wait for the millennials to come in.
You're a good golf partner. You keep putting the ball on the tee. So let me have a swing at this. The white paper that you've delivered.
Sorry, I'm sorry to interrupt.
Yes.
I have a specific question about
Okay,
this.
jump in.
This
I'll come
proposal.
back to the
Thank
white
you
paper.
very much for presenting that. Just to push one iota further. Do you think it's completely crazy to take part of the management fee, and I think it's very laudable to put it into carbon and carbon reductions, but is it also possible to take either or part of the management fee to help mature the pipeline? Because you said it's not difficult to do so, but every time that I speak to somebody on the finance side, you always complain, rightly so, that the projects are there, but they're not mature enough to actually be brought to walked into the bank. So has someone actually thought about that, about taking part of the management fee and pre-investing it, so to speak, into the promising projects that are there, or companies in your case, so that you can actually bring it closer?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if it's the exact terminology you use, but there are plenty of projects around. That's really just an excuse to delay. There's a huge renewable energy. I mean, we have a huge infrastructure group that is funded by so many companies around the globe. The projects are there. It's just a matter of lining them up, and it's a matter of the banks, it's a matter of bringing private capital, but these projects are there. So I think it's more of a delay tactic than it is the reality
So
of
glad
it.
to hear you
Believe
say
me,
that.
we can find plenty of places for people to invest their money and get good returns, have an impact, and create good sustainability.
Let's give a bit of airtime to this white paper then, because you put a significant amount of work into it yet again. Here are a couple of the fun facts from that report. The UBS Investor Watch survey found that 81% of respondents want to align their spending patterns to their values. And I don't know if we're just talking about millennials here. 71% would consciously avoid buying from firms with perceived negative environmental, social and governance practices, or ESG. Do you want to talk to some of those points and who that customer is who now wants to align their spending habits with their investment habits?
You know, it's across the board. So let me tell you, I, as a chair, connect twice a year to our top 120 investors. And I usually see them on governance issue. We have, in addition to the board, I run a committee which is called the Corporate Culture and Responsibility Committee. When I talked to investors 5 years ago, they wanted to talk about governance, pay, and all the usual issues. Now they say, can we spend half the meeting with you as a chair on governance and pay, and the other half on environmental and impact investing? So the investor community is changing, and Rob is absolutely right. There is a strong urge in the millennials, and why we often start from the millennials is they're that generation that will be the inheritance of a huge amount of wealth globally. And in many discussions in our family offices, for example, it's the principal, but it's the entire family, including the millennials that are there. And they increasingly take decisions as a family rather than the principal investing on behalf of the family. And so there is a huge demand in our client base. There is a huge push in our investor base. And, you know, Rob and his firm, the letter that Larry writes every year to investors is making very, very clear. They're spearheading that, but there is a lot of work in this area. The one area where I think Rob made a very important distinction, and we work on that in the white paper, is we talk of investments on behalf of clients, whether it's in our wealth management and asset management business or Rob in his business. The one area, Christina, where you're rightly saying we haven't made a lot of progress is on the investment side. I've engaged with the G20 for the last 15 years. And the issue of investing and greenfield and brownfield and what can the G20 do, unfortunately, in the public sector was an on-off. It was a big issue in the Australian presidency. It was lingering on in the Chinese. Then in the Turkish presidency, it kind of took a bit of back seat. So it moves back and forth. And the real area where we, outside investors and outside clients, as institutions, as banks, have some limitations in investing and in funding through credit or raising funding is there is huge capital requirements for the industry as a whole attached to infrastructure products because they're seen as very risky long-term projects. And the philosophy in the financial regulation is the more longer term it is, the more risky it is, the higher the capital requirements. So in a way, to have banks, intermediaries, work as an additional avenue for investing, you might have to revisit that in the public sector as well because it's not something of our choice. It is part of the regulation within which we operate. But on the client side, on the investor side, as Rob was saying, there's a huge demand for that. And we can be super connectors between those that want to invest and the products that we need to develop. As Rob was saying on the ETF side, for us, for example, for World Bank debt and creating that as a private investable assets and adding it into our mandates, we can be innovative in the areas where we have expertise to develop the investment vehicles and assets in which our clients can invest. And that's, I think, the area where we can add a lot of dynamics. Of course, you need a more holistic approach. The more you get investment banks and a larger investor community to this infrastructure, to this impact investing, the better it would be. But I think it still needs some work on the regulatory side to really get to the full benefit of where we
Stephanie, jump in.
So I want to come back to the question that Christina raised, which is, how do we start now? And I think we have to differentiate, and often we conflate ESG and impact, and they are really different things. ESG, in my view, is table stakes. If you take our environmental and social standards and convert them, we could create today a set of KPIs, and we could measure every single infrastructure investment. We know that. But impact investing is more. It's about putting values to investment. And this is why we've decided, and thank you, Axel, for the shout out, to create our impact investment management framework, because we really believe that if asset managers are going to be creating investment vehicles, asset owners need to know what they're investing in before we impact wash. And so what we've really said is, let's go further. Let's create 9 principles that we can all agree to, and we have probably 100 different asset owners and allocators who are willing to come to our spring meetings and sign up to the principles. But the principles are life cycle. They're not just, I'm going to invest. They really say you have the intent to do the right thing. You're willing to say how you're going to measure. And then you actually measure and use external validation. And then when you liquidate the asset, you prove you make money. And I think you need all of those kinds of things. And we need people to step up to one standard over time. So we can pull ESG in. I think ESG is going to become like financial statements. It's just something everyone's going to do. And that's how we start correcting for climate now, as we add those values into the impact framework.
This is flagged up in that white paper that you've produced. There are 3 points: awareness, simplicity, which is what we're talking about here, having a standard, but also some of the complexity issues, how you tackle them. Christiane, I want to come back to you because you've been trying to bring consensus together on climate change, sustainability. Coming up with one standard for impact investing, how hard is that challenge through your lens?
Well, it is difficult and it is not insurmountable. It cannot be insurmountable because it is absolutely necessary, because you can't be operating in niche and retailing every single operation that you do. That way you don't get to scale and you certainly don't get to speed. Mm-hmm. So you absolutely need to do that. And the most perhaps germane example that comes to mind right now is what cities actually did over a space of about 2 to 3 years, where there were 9,000 cities that were actually quantifying their emission reductions and their emissions with different matrices, all based on the same principles, but actually 1 ton was not exactly 1 ton in all cities. And that makes it very difficult then to compare the impact of any investment or any credit line that is given. So So over the space of, unfortunately, 2 or 3 years, they finally all came together to one measurement standard that now all cities actually measure their emissions and their emission reductions according to the same standard. That's good news for all of you, because now you know that cities will actually be consistent one with the other. Now we have to do the same standardization and simplification. It's not just about standardizing, right? It's about simplifying so that we can get to scale and speed. But I hope it doesn't take you 2 or 3 years.
It sounds like you need a little bit of help from the top, and while we might from big business, from capital markets getting involved, what about governments? Because the US government, President Trump, pulled out of the Paris Accord, which dealt a blow to some...
First, because 60% of the US economy continues to decarbonize, because they have understood that it's actually good for their bottom line if they're a private company, or good for their economy if it is a subnational, either a state or a city. So, you know, the forces of the market are actually on our side. And it's actually, I think, pretty sad that the person who is currently sitting in Washington doesn't understand that this is of interest and very much to the benefit of the U.S. economy to maintain a certain sense of competitiveness vis-a-vis other economies, China, India, Mexico, that are actually decarbonizing and are producing the goods and services that are decarbonized and that, that clients increasingly want. And the second reason why I'm not exceedingly concerned about that is because we have seen political cycles. That is the price that we pay for democracy, right? And political cycles are just like waves in front of the ocean. We have a high tide, we have a low tide. What is important is the current. It's not the tides, because we will always have political tides. The current that we see is a current that is incontrovertibly moving toward decarbonization. At some point, the United States federal government will have to join other subnational governments and the private sector in the United States that is actually doing the right thing.
That said, Rob, let me drag you in here. We know investors do follow the mood music around politics. If we have a government that is willing to invest in one sector versus another, investors very often get involved in that sector that the government is supporting. So the fact that the president has not given a clear signal that he wants to support the environment, how negative has that been, and particularly as we talk about impact investing?
Capital is going to flow where there's going to be a good return and where they can have an impact. Governments come, governments go, changes in policies. Capital still flows where it's going to make a good return and do good.
Yeah.
So this reminds me a bit of the municipal market in the United States, where it's tax-free, but people invest in infrastructure through that. They get some sort of tax benefit, but people would like to see the investment that they're making. They'd like it to have a social impact. They'd like it to be long-term. They'd like to use it. So you watch people go across a bridge that you might have invested in. All of those things are good. But where the government can come in is to help create some standards. So even in carbon today, someone might say that you might want to buy BlackRock stock because we have a lower carbon footprint than UBS does. Now, the reason we do is because they have more offices than we do. That's not really what we meant by a carbon footprint and you know, stacking up the companies that are going to perform well. So I think by having some of the standards, as we were talking about, and getting close, it's really not that proprietary to have your own index. Eventually, it'll all come to one. And then once we have that standard, we can stack up companies that meet those, and then we can prove that there'll be more performance for the companies that are having an impact than not having an impact. So I think where a government can come in, whether it's this government or that government, is not be in the way of us moving towards standards that are good. And then each government will have the thing that they want to emphasize more than others. That's less important to me.
Axel, does Trump stand in the way of impact investing?
Oh, look, we're a global company working out of Switzerland. Of course, we have a very strong presence also in the US, but also in the Asian Pacific market and all over Europe. So what matters for us is the global community and where that global community is going. I can tell you, working out of Switzerland, you can see the impact of climate change every time you go to the glaciers and to the mountains. The Swiss are very aware of the impact of climate change on our environment because we see it every day. And actually, the Swiss environment is part of the assets that the country has used for decades. Tourism is a very big industry, and so there's very much aware. Actually, I think our offices were 100% renewable energy because Switzerland has a very hydro-oriented, given its geographical position, a very hydro energy mix. And so I think we are very aware of that, both as a corporation for our own carbon footprint, but also as an investor globally. And there is very different demands. If you go, for example, to China, don't make a mistake. Chinese president here last year gave a very impressive speech that both on the environmental front, they want to lead rather than lag. Because every time you go to China, you see environmental issues have really, they're right in your face. And therefore, they know it's time to change things. So I understand and I fully appreciate and support this sense of urgency that Christina has said. But, again, just on what we can do, we can help mainstream this. And let me add one dimension. It needs to be an investor choice. So the one area that we also talk in the white paper about, you got to individualize these investments, especially when it comes on impact. People care about different things. People care about impact in different dimensions. And there are many dimensions where some investors would like to see social impact, others would like to see environmental impact. So it's an investor choice. We need to create the product space and the diversity of investments that all fall in this area. And what we're doing, that's why I like to use the word super connector. We're connecting investors and their investor preferences to assets. And as Rob was saying, if you look at one asset class, so what this needs to be doing, we've done it in so many markets in the past. You need a good underlying market of investments. You need indices. So you basically need to provide audited and checked entrance indices where basically if you're in that index, you can be invested because you're certified to qualify for certain aspects of that investment which qualifies for impact. And once you've got actually an underlying market, an index market, and then you need to start derivative markets. You don't want people selling in and out of these. So you need a more complex financial arrangement to make markets deeper, to make them more liquid, and to add sort of, derivative markets and futures markets and forward markets. So what we need to do here is basically what we've done very successfully in many other markets and just repeat it. And I agree with you. We can't take the time we've taken in other markets to develop it. Developing these markets really needs a lot of intention. And I think, I always compare this to the marathon. If you look at the 2 to 7 trillion that we need to invest annually, it looks a daunting task. But if you look at the size of almost 250 trillion markets out there, it doesn't look such a bad thing. We just need to channel that money into the right direction. Yeah. And what we need to do is we need to focus on the ones that lead these transformations. But again, the ones that lead are always in the headline. It's like with the marathon. If you run at the front, you get a lot of attention. What we need to also make sure is that the laggards are brought in. This is a bit like the broom car in a marathon, If you're not really getting your act together and you're just not going along with the group, there can be some divergence in speed, but we should also make sure that if the laggards don't come on the game, then basically we might just face a lot of regulatory pressures down the road. And it's in the interest of the industry to avoid regulation, to go for self-regulation and to go for commitments. And I think that's where the industry is really having to deliver.
Let's talk about those laggards, because I do have concerns that this is a conversation that stays with the top 1%. If you think about who was leading the charge on climate change recently, it was President Macron in France. So he brings endeavours to his country to raise taxes on fuel to pay for some of the climate change, to have impact on the environment. What happens? He has yellow vest protesters on the street. The Swiss may get it, but the French don't want to pay for it. So when you talk about having momentum beyond just millennials and people with wealth as we have a good economy, don't you have concerns that the time is now passed us by. We had the financial crisis, the evolution where people felt better about their prospects. Now we're right back to 2007, where if we have a downturn in the economy, people suddenly don't care about the environment anymore, and they don't care about impact investing on environmental principles. Isn't that a risk?
I think we just have to apply common sense. If we look at a market like that, you will always have different players. I always compare it to the good, the bad, and the ugly. For the good, we don't have to do a lot because they go ahead. For the bad, we probably need to threaten regulation for them to get their act together. For the ugly, you need to exclude them. So exclusion in a lot of impact investing and a lot of social and environmental investing is very strong. There are investor companies, there are shareholder advisors who basically tell you the carbon footprint of this company is such that we do not recommend our client base to invest in these companies. Right. And so I think you know, by looking at these three areas, I'd rather be in the pocket of the good that go ahead than be in the pocket that lags behind or be in the one that actually threatens, be threatened by regulation. And I think everyone will look at it like that.
Stephanie, let's get you on.
So I would actually go back and maybe pick up where you left off, Christina. If you look at our twin goals, alleviating poverty and creating shared prosperity, two of the areas that challenge us the most are urbanization and climate. If we get investing in those two areas wrong, the fragility and conflict that we leave our children will be insurmountable. So we have to tackle them right. In the Paris Climate Agreement, we agreed no more upstream oil and gas investment because we know we have to lead. But we also have a very large cities program. So we have a $57 billion portfolio, all invested against our ESG standards. So we know that we're doing the right thing. So when we lean into cities and we say, so in the case of Antalya, we've done 10 investments over 10 years, helping them move to a better urbanization, using technology, using their infrastructure properly in an environmentally and social way, a proper way. So that's where we have to continue to lean in and lead.
What do you make of the conflict among urban areas? I mean, this whole conversation talks about poverty, bringing those higher up the wealth scale. But the problem when you talk about the global economy these days is that it's the middle class that are being hurt. They feel like they're not paying and not part of this economic journey. So you have conflict on the streets, people who don't want to pay for any more endeavours around poverty and the environment because their savings are dwindling. The same people that you are asking to contribute to pension pots to pay and fund impact investing.
So everyone, not all of them, but many of them do have a pension pot. And very much like BlackRock, they need selection criteria. So if there are selection criteria that speak to their values, my view is that they will actually choose the right place to put their money. And it's not going to be identical very much, Axel, what you were saying. I might be, a university endowment, and I care about elementary education. That's where they need to be able to connect and measure. I might care about climate, so I'll invest in a climate fund. But we need to give all investors, including, owners of small pensions, the ability to put their money where their values are.
Rob, are there risks here that there are hallmarks of 2007, that we are having a conversation that might just fall by the wayside if there is a downturn?
No, I don't think so. I think the infrastructure is better now. I think the capitalization is better. I think economically we're in a much better place right now. And I would say that I think we have to have a lot more confidence in the population around the globe that given these choices, they're going to make the right decisions. It's a matter of giving them the choice, proving to them that it's a good choice, marketing it a bit as well. You have to do that. But at the end of the day, we also have to make sure the projects that this capital is going to, the one that is not going to work, will have a lot of effect on all the ones that do work. So we have to work on this together, and we have to have checkpoints along the way. And if we're going to invest in it, and if Axel's firm and my firm are going to recommend this, we have an obligation to keep our promises and make sure that it works. So that's why it's a much longer pipe. It's not just the capital to the project, it's the project to completion and success. And that's what we all sign up for when we do this.
Well, let's hear from each of you how you avoid impact washing. We have integrity in this investment sector.
Well, look, it's very simple. If you look 20, 30 years in the past, and I can see it in my home country, Germany, the Green Party is now a key driver of politics. They're actually the marginal party that swings governments at the moment. 20 years ago, many of the members of the Green Party were out there on the street. Now they work for us. They're in our corporations. They are looking for engagement on their job to do things that drive the economy. If we want to involve this workforce in the future, we have to give them tasks where they see a meaning in what they do. And so for us as companies, we have to make that change. The word I always use for that, just because it's catchy, is we need to finance change, so finance needs to change. And I think that is where we really need to drive this. We need to work with the younger generations and with those that join the company. And when I talk to a 25, 30-year-old, which actually happened a lot when I was a university professor, it happens too rarely now because I just see the upper echelons of our bank, they will tell you, these are my preferences, and I would like to do a job that has X, Y, Z. And it's not about money. It's about doing something where they see and feel a sense of purpose. And if we cannot offer these people a job where they have a sense of purpose, working in the financial industry, we have a problem long run. So I think it's in our own interest to create this, if there were any risk of a conflict or, an inconsistency, we have to resolve that because it's in our own interest.
This is something that I've heard now at several events at Davos, is CEOs of companies have said that they're not going to be able to hire the right people or keep the right people if that company is not showing that they're doing things for the environment, making an impact on others. So it is a tool to attract, and you can't just do it in advertising because the turnover will be large, and that's very expensive. So it's going to be a competitive advantage to companies that are doing things to attract employees. That's really interesting because there's push-pull here, and that could also help in getting capital to the right companies that are more successful because they can attract a better workforce.
We've got 1 minute left, and I want to hear the last word from both of you.
So I would just say, in the next 10 years, 75% of the investable money is going to come from millennials and women. The asset owners want to put their money where their values are, and it's incumbent on us to help the fund managers figure out a set of principles so that the asset owner can match their desires with the funds that are being created. And right now, we're not quite there. We don't have the set of standards. So owners put their money into a fund, and it could be impact washing. So we've got to marry those two things together, get the principles out there so that the owners, the allocators, and the fund managers can all work together in a continuum.
Christiana.
I would say that we haven't quite finished turning the corner, but we're very much in that transition process in which we're not, even with an economic downturn, we're not going to be choosing between environmental integrity or performance and financial performance. We have now understood that those two things actually come together. We have understood that actually doing the right thing by climate, by all of the other environmental and social, is precisely what puts the values into the value of the investment. And so that's why I don't think that we need to choose anymore between those two things. Gratefully, because we may be facing an economic downturn, in which case we have to recognize that actually addressing climate change is the growth story of the 21st century. It is that actually has the capacity to create 65 million jobs, to channel $90 trillion into the global economy, and at the same time address climate change. So fortunately, we're not choosing anymore. We're actually being able to align the imperatives and have the impact written with an I, capital I.
On that optimistic note, we must leave it there. And I look forward to reading the next paper, the 2020 White Paper on Impact Investing, to see where we've moved to. Thank you so much to our panel, to Stephanie, Cristiano, Rob and Axel. Appreciate your time here in the Sanctuary at Davos.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Very well done.